So yeah, welcome everyone to Drisha. So happy to be learning together again this week. This class is conversations on the Parashah, and each week we have different members from Drisha's learning community. This week we're welcoming Rabbanit Leah Sarna and Miss Noah Bat Miri. Just a few words about how we run the classes for anyone who's joining us for the first time today. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions during class verbally. Just keep yourself muted when you're not actively speaking so that we don't have background noise. You can also engage in writing by chat here on Zoom or as a comment on Facebook. Rabbanit Leah Sarna is a member of Drisha's faculty and our director of team programs. And Miss Noah Bat Miri is the head of Drisha's administrative team. So great to have them both with us, and I'll let you lead.
Thank you so much, Evie. So this week, we're going to be talking about Parashat Tetzaveh, and I wanted to just give people a brief reminder of what this is. I know that sometimes if there isn't really a narrative, a story in the Parasha, we can kind of forget what it's about. So Tetzaveh comes from the same root as the word mitzvah. We are literally just being commanded. We're being told to do things. So we're being told to bring pure oil for the menorah, for the Eish Tamid, to keep it lit forever. We're being told about Bigdei Kohanim, what we have to dress our priestly caste in. We're being told about the initiation for the Kohanim, and we are also being told about the construction of the golden altar for the temple. So we are going to be focusing in on Bigdei Kohanim, and I would like to thank Rabbanit Sarna for entertaining me on this one. And when I said I want to talk about clothes, he didn't say, no, that's silly. I know that there's kind of a struggle that a lot of women scholars have, where there's an idea of there's girly Torah, or Torah that's appropriate for women and subjects that are appropriate for women. And there can be a tension between focusing on that and playing it safe, or staying away from that because you want to be taken seriously. But Rabbanit Sarna, I'm very grateful for a number of reasons, but one reason is that you take girly Torah seriously. You believe that women's Torah, women's issues, and things that are currently associated with women, even though they really involve all of us, deserve the same rigor, deserve the same consideration, and they haven't always had that. So thank you for always holding up that torch. And I have a background in fashion and apparel, so that's part of why it's very interesting to me, because it isn't a frivolous thing. It might seem that way in modern times, but our clothing has a lot of functions and purposes. Protection, I think that's particularly interesting in a religious scenario when we're talking about the Kohen Gadol. How is he being protected from what or whom? What is being signaled socially by the clothing? And just, aesthetics in general. I don't think that they're worthless. But Rabbanit Sarna, why has the Torah spent so much time, dedicated so much ink to clothes?
Yeah, well, I think let's take a look at, these are the first two sources in the source sheet if anyone wants to open it up. But I think it makes sense to kind of just look at it inside, because I think the Torah tells us itself kind of what this is all about. So if we look at the beginning of Exodus 28, bring forward your brother Aaron, his sons from among the Israelites, to serve me as priests. They're going to be my priests. And here are their names: Aaron, Nadav, Abihu, Elazar, Itamar. And how do you make these people into priests? Oh, it says the Torah, I know how you become a priest. You put on the priest clothes. So nowadays you would say there's the classic joke, right? The man comes to a rabbi and says, Rabbi, make me a Kohen. And the rabbi says, that's not how it works, bud. I can't make you a Kohen. I just can't, there's nothing I can do. He says, no, please, I need to be a Kohen. Please make me a Kohen. And the rabbi says, there's really, I can't I can't make you a Kohen. I'm so sorry. There's really nothing I can do. Says, fine, I'll go to another rabbi, goes to another rabbi, same conversation. All these rabbis say, I can't make you a Kohen. And then eventually some rabbi says, you know what, like, can you tell me, like, why do you want to be a Kohen? And the guy says back, my father was a Kohen, his father was a Kohen, and his father was a Kohen. I want to be a Kohen also. But so the joke is, right? I think everyone got it, but the joke is that the priesthood is passed down patrilineally, and so you can't just like make someone who's not a Kohen into a Kohen. But if someone's father was a Kohen and his father was a Kohen, his father was a Kohen too, you betcha, you don't need anyone to make you a Kohen. You already are one. But not so for Aaron the priest, right? Not so for Aaron and his sons. There were no Kohanim until right now. Last week we started dreaming of building the Mishkan, and this week we're figuring out how it's going to run. And guess what? If you build a factory and there's no one to run it, or no robots to run it either, I guess nowadays, then like your factory is not going to be very useful, right? So like you can't have a mikdash or a Mishkan without anyone who's working there. And so here's how we're doing that. And Noah mentioned that part of the project then is like the initiation or the creation, right? Here we have all these people, but how do we then turn them into this priestly class? And the first move, right? You're going to pick these people, and what are we going to do with them? We're going to dress them right. And I know I'd love to hear if you have thoughts about even just the idea of like you put on the clothes and all of a sudden that gets you ready for the job you're going to have. I know there's a lot of people always say, particularly, I mean, you brought in the gender lens, like dress for the, they tell women like dress for the job you wish you had, not the job you have, or all kinds of things like that. I'm wondering whether you want to chime in on that.
Right. Well, I definitely have that example in my own life with my mother. I know she was, I will say, very ritualistic about getting dressed for her career as a professor running her own program for over 40 years. And I just always remember as a child watching her. She had a lot of professors have this, but they keep track of what they've worn in each class, so they don't have too many repeats, wind up looking like a cartoon character or something of the sort. But we also have it throughout Tanakh. And also in the Apocrypha, we see people getting dressed for things that they're about to do. One I'll always remember
Esther puts on Matilbash Esther Malchut, right?
Exactly.
She puts on, doesn't even say the clothes she put on. It says she put on her royalty.
Right. And arguably Tamar, she gets dressed in her disguise, and apocryphally Yehudit, she gets dressed up to go out and become Yehudit, become immortalized in text. So, and that's just the ladies, Jonathan putting his garb on David, that's deeply symbolic, literally transferring royalty to David in the clothing. I think we have, Fran, you could just call it out.
I have a question that might sound silly, but and I have another one that's not. But anyway, when I think of a Kohen, the first thing that comes to my mind is the regular Kohanim would perform sacrifices, and they're wearing such beautiful clothes, but there's no indication that they have. I know the high priest has an ephod, which is translated as apron, but I'm sure it doesn't mean to keep them clean. It doesn't make sense to me that they would wear these beautiful clothes to slaughter animals. My second question is, maybe it's a little early, but what are the differences? I know there are 4 garments for the regular priest and 8 for the Kohen Gadol. What is the difference in the clothing, and what does it signify? But
Sarna, do you want to take either of these, or?
I feel like you have ideas. Go for it.
So with regards to the first one, it's not just the beauty of the garments of the Kohanim, it's white, undyed linen, something that will be colored by the work that they're doing. And I don't know how familiar anyone here is with different, I know that Rabbanit Sarna has completed all of the Mishnah, so this is old hat to her, but there's a lot of details in there about getting gussied up for the holidays and the processes of basically whitewashing areas in the temple that were bloodstained. So there are a lot of resources being put into temple life, including, I don't want to call them non-renewable resources, but you can't necessarily get all the bloodstains out of Big Day Kohanim. You can't, but it's a consequence of what we're giving to God that this might be a one-time use thing. And we will have to get, new Big Day Kohanim for the next sacrifice, or when it's sufficiently dirtied. I'm not sure of the exact amount of blood that would render it unusable, but I know it's not like I can very much be the type of person who will wear something until I can't go out in public in it because it just has too many holes. But I think that they had a cleaner cutoff point for use of the actual garment, and any garment was very precious at that time. But anything that you read about the temple, just think about the most wasteful, resource-intensive way of doing things, and that's most likely pretty close to what they were aiming for, because it isn't wasteful. It's giving our material subsistence over to God, over in the service of God.
I would add to that, though, that I think, we sometimes have in our heads a picture of like a water fight, but with blood happening. And like the blood was actually like really controlled, because the blood is the point, right? Like the blood is like the thing that's accomplishing the expiation that's happening in the temple, which means that, and it's not the case that like when you slaughter an animal, and especially like these people were talented at slaughter, like they were doing it all the time. It's not the case that like blood shoots out everywhere. Like it's controlled, and in fact you have to like do stuff with the blood, even in Cholin, like even outside of the temple, right? Like when the blood drains down onto the floor, you have to cover it. And so like blood in our religion is like, especially animal blood, both of sacrificial and non-sacrificial animals, is like really controlled. Like we really wouldn't want a situation where blood is like going everywhere, dripping out, getting all messy and all over the place. Like I don't even think that that's not the image I want you to necessarily like have in your head of what's happening at the temple. And when they're sprinkling the blood, that's like quite specific and directed and exactly. And the blood is in a container, right? How does the blood get in a container if it's like all over the floor and all over my clothes? It's not. Right? The blood is coming out of an animal. It's being collected. It's being sprinkled very specifically. And obviously there would be spills and there would be mistakes because they're people. But at the other hand, like they're not meant to be just like normal people. And if you have a klutzy Kohen, like he's not going to get that work going forward, And we have quite a lot of description about how Kohanim were trained and selected and all of that. Yeah. So I think in addition to being like a resource-rich environment, as Noah was describing, I think to imagine that, you serve once and your clothes are covered in blood by the end, like that's not how I envision that, at least.
Or it shouldn't happen that way, but obviously like things do happen, blood pressure differences in animals, we'll put it that way. But yeah, it is not a type of waste that they were necessarily deeply concerned about. I think anyone who does laundry in their household, like, would recoil at that idea, but very different worlds in the temple dealing with divine service, holy service. And I think the other question was about the differences in Big Day Kahuna regular and the Kohen Gadol's more extensive, more elaborate wardrobe and fit, and the symbology within that. And I think we can't talk about all of it, because if we wanted to have a class on the ephod, it would be more than an hour. But I think we are going to narrow things down a little bit.
Yeah. Right. So let's go back to Psukim, because we just saw at the beginning of Exodus 28, we talked about just like what's the point of the clothes? Like the clothes are making the Kohen, and the clothes are what turn these people, good people, into like lechahanoli. Like that's what makes them Kohanim of God. And then there's more to it. So let's keep going. And what's specifically for the high priest? You're going to make special clothes for dignity and adornment. So the special clothes for the high priest, those are specifically, and I like that the Torah doesn't have any extra words. So like there's a difference between kavod and tiferet. There's a difference between honor and glory, maybe would be other ways, or honor and beauty. And that it's not just, oh, he's supposed to be like extra, like you'll see him, everyone else is wearing the same uniform and they're all normal priests. And then this guy, he's all blinged out. So he's like the extra fancy priest. So you should dignify him. Like, it's not just about the dignity. It's also about the beauty of it, like extra artisanal labor going into these extra garments that this one person is wearing. And that teaches you, give this person extra honor, but also the clothes are not just for honor, they're literally for like the aesthetics of it. And I think the kavod and tiferet, when we're thinking about like what's the point of clothing, I think that's that seeming or potential redundancy, but like trying to divide those two words actually teaches us something about what clothes do. That clothing both like in a way dictates how we at least want people to be engaging with us, that it tells people I'm important, or I'm serious, or I'm relaxed, or I'm silly, or I'm a creative, or I'm a goth, or I'm feeling these emotions today, or I wish I hadn't had to leave my home today and that's why I'm wearing sweatpants in public, or whatever it is, right? It communicates to people like something about how we're feeling and how we want them to interact with us. That's one piece of clothing. And then there's the piece of clothing that's just, this is beautiful, this is aesthetically gorgeous, and I as a human have the opportunity to adorn myself and wear jewelry and wear beautiful fabrics and wear art. And I always think about that in terms of, this is the second time today I've referenced the Met Gala, probably the second time in my whole life, but right, like what's the point of the clothing? Is like you're going to a museum and you're becoming a living work of art on your way into a gala for an art museum. And there's something very beautiful about that. And that's then turns to like, what is the point of the Kohanim? They're there to be aesthetically beautiful also. So they're servants and they're working and they're doing that as well. But just the way that all of the vessels of the Mikdash and the Mishkan had to be gorgeous, so too the priests who are working there, like they're part of the art of the space itself, and that the aesthetics of it actually matters. No, I see you having so many thoughts. Let's have it.
Yeah. So this is one of those questions that it might just be for people to chew on rather than looking for a specific answer. But when we talk about kavod, when we say that, that's something that's relational, right? So who needs to have, whether we want to call it respect, dignity, this sense of weightiness to the Kohen's appearance? Is that for the Kohen himself? Is that for the larger community of Kohanim to see, like, this is what it means to be one of us? Is that for the general public to look and say, oh yes, this is a good, nice, shiny priestly cast, I can get behind this? Is it for God? Does God get respect for the Kohanim, or does God just say, like, you were obedient, check mark? Who is that for? Because I could imagine, like, particularly like when we look at a story like Yehudit or Esther, getting some confidence from getting dressed appropriately and getting dressed in a more exalted fashion and saying, like, maybe I, as a human, couldn't do what I'm about to do, but if I put on my fancy Kohen clothing, then I can do this as a Kohen. And 100%. It's not something small that we're asking for. So just who is benefiting from Big Day Kahuna? Who is benefiting? Just that's again a question to maybe think about rather than answer.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the answer is like all of the above. And maybe it plays out differently in different moments or different settings, but as you said, like, we're pouring a lot of resources into this, so it better be doing multiple duties. Okay. Okay, so then we're gonna recruit all of these people who are chochmei lev, right? And I think that's such beautiful like language for artisanship. And the idea that our clothing should be made by people who are chochmei lev is so remote from how our clothing are currently being made. We'll probably move on from that, but I just always have so many feelings about the fact that our clothes are made by some combination of machines and slave labor, and that there's really almost no choice in that matter. And to compare that to what's being described here about what it means to dress for the service of the Almighty, is that even like the spinning of the wool or whatever needs to be done by people who have a certain like heart intelligence to them, and that like that intentionality needs to be part of it from the beginning. I think is just like very, very beautiful. Okay. And so here's the list, as Fran mentioned before. These are the vestments for the high priest: a breastplate, an ephod. An ephod is like an apron-y thing. A robe, a fringed tunic that goes like under the robe and under the apron. We're kind of going from the outside in here. And then we have our headdress, and then we have a sash, and we're gonna also later have a frontlet at seats. And they shall make those sacral vestments for your brother Aaron and his sons for priestly service to me. They therefore shall receive the gold, the blue, purple, crimson yarns, and fine linen. We sometimes knit or crochet for people we love. Absolutely, Debbie. Yeah, and I think there's something so meaningful about that. Like I have a scarf that my grandma made for me, or like she makes my son's little sweaters and stuff. And it's so beautiful. And like you think about the person who made it when they wear it.
And we still recognize those as labors of love, because if you want to buy something of that nature from someone who doesn't love you, that's really going to set you back a lot. For a lot of folks, that might be, depending on the garment, the cost of their entire wardrobe. Like one sweater could be something like $400. And it's worth that in terms of labor costs, the hours that went into it. But again, like that's abnormal in a good way, in the sense that like we love getting knit and crochet items from the people who love us and care about us and are giving us the wisdom of their hearts. But again, like it's a totally different world that we live in. But it's fascinating that we still have that connection. We still do have people doing traditional crafts to remind us of the way things might have been.
Yeah, I mean, I crochet, like I make kippahs for all the men in my family, and I've made for women also, but no women in my family want to wear them. And it really is. It's like a labor of love, and then also like the pride that I feel when I see them wearing them around. It's like quite extensive.
And if I may add, sometimes you make blankets or things for people who are ill, and you imbue them with love. And then when they surround themselves with it, it also adds a level of love and warmth to it that a store-bought item doesn't have.
Absolutely.
It's not just clothing, it's other things. And there's a heightened level there that it's like when you eat store-bought food or food that's made at home, you can taste the love in it. That's a special ingredient too.
Totally. Okay, so when I was envisioning this class, I was envisioning that we would kind of narrow in our conversation to be about head covering. And the reason why I did that is because I think that often when we teach people about head and hair covering, particularly for women, I think we tell the narrative wrong. That I think that a lot of the sources where we start with are sources that just presuppose that every woman is, or especially every married woman, is covering her hair. And so we never talk about why she would cover her hair, or what the point is in hair covering. We just talk about how bad it would be for her to like break with society and not cover her hair. And that's the Gemara and Ketubot, and that's the Sota stuff, and that's the Brachot stuff for people who are like familiar with the kind of classic sources, and for people who aren't. Noah, and I linked some stuff at the end of the source sheet, so you can kind of like fill that in on your own time if you want to. But I think like when I teach about head and hair covering, I like to start with actually these sources, because what's going on the Kohen Gadol's head, and even on a normal Kohen's head, is like really cool and really interesting. And I think inspires like head and hair covering could inspire head and hair covering for all the rest of us. I think a way to think about it, or like a model for all of this, is like a lot of people who wear uniforms professionally, those uniforms come with hats. So if you think about, like the guards with the big floofy hats in England, or you think about people in the military, like there's often hats, or if you are at a graduation, you wear a special fancy hat, and maybe there's even a different hat for undergrads than there is for graduate students, than the university president is wearing. And like all those different gradations of hats within those uniforms tell you something. And when you actually get your diploma, you change your hat at a graduation, often at least, and that there's something about hats and head coverings that are quite specific and quite important, and really worth thinking about, particularly nowadays, because really until not very long ago, everyone covered their head. Like when Jackie Kennedy went out without something on top of her head, like, and she's not some like from a woman, like she's not a member of our community, let's say. It was a really big deal that Jackie Kennedy wasn't wearing a hat. And in her day, right, men and women covered their heads whenever they were outside, and that was actually just normal. The Queen of England always, may her memory be a blessing, right? Like always wore like these really amazing, cool hats when she was out and about. And so nowadays we actually like, it's kind of new that head covering is not so normal. And obviously that's been different in different places and different times. But in America, at least, it's like really the last like 50 years where people aren't covering their heads all the time. And that means that it's like all of a sudden countercultural when Jewish men and women do cover their heads, when Jewish men are walking down the streets wearing hats that everyone used to wear 50 years ago, and now that makes them a target for anti-Semitism. So like, why are you still wearing a hat all the time? Or why be identifiable in this way? Why why take the risk? What's the benefit of covering our heads? And I think the story of the benefit for why we should cover our heads starts in this week's Parashah. And so that's where I want to kind of take our conversation from here. So let's just take a look quickly at what is the Kohen Gadol wearing on his head. So we have a tzitz, which is a frontlet, but maybe also kind of the model for where tzitzit go after this. So just to already plant that we have these clothes that are special to the Kohanim, but then they sort of infiltrate to everyone, and that there's a way in which everyone is a Kohen. So one of the things that's unique about the tzitz is that it has on it a patil techelet. So then in Bamidbar, when we have, all of a sudden everyone is wearing tzitzit, that seems to be like a nod or a relationship to this frontlet with the techelet that's tying it on, that is worn by the Kohen Gadol. So we make him a tzitz, we tie it on with techelet. Oh, and for me, that's also like a nod to like there's priestly garments that then infiltrate. And what all Jews then are wearing something that is like a nod to what these people are wearing. Okay. And on Parashat Korach, we can talk about all the complexities of that. Okay, so we make him a frontlet, tie it on with techelet, and that techelet is on the mitznefet. So the mitznefet is the Kohen's turban, his like headdress, and that and what does it do? And this is where we're going to see two things here that were on Noah's original list of what is the point of clothing. So we're going to see two things. One is that, what does it do? It is V'nasa v'haya al metach Aaron. It's going to sit on his forehead. V'nasa Aaron et avon hakodashim asher yagdishu b'nei Yisrael l'chol manot hashem. It shall be on Aaron's forehead that Aaron may take away any sin arising from the holy things that the Israelites consecrate from any of their secret donations. So all of a sudden, this clothing is also an expiation. It's also a kapara. It's also an atonement. Like, what does it mean for clothing to be an atonement? That's really interesting. So that's one piece of this. And then, so now just to recap, we have a turban, we have a mitznafet, we have a tzitz on the forehead. And again, what are all these things? And then we're making also some clothing for the children of Aaron, which was part of the question we saw earlier. Okay, so for Aaron's sons, you should also make turbans and sashes, tunics, sashes, and turbans. Again, l'chavodu l'tifaret. So we saw that language of dignity and adornment by Aaron, and now we're seeing it by his sons. And you're gonna get them all dressed, and you're gonna anoint them, and you're gonna ordain them and consecrate them, anoint them, ordain them, consecrate them to serve them, for them to serve for me as priests. So mashachta otam milita idam kidashta otam, and then you're gonna make them priests. So really, it's the clothing and the anointing. It's all this external stuff that's going on their bodies that at this point is going to make them into priests. And then the other thing you have for them are these underwear. We hear about priestly underwear, which I think is just so great. Because remember, we have these tunics, right? So we have this like full body thing, but we also have underwear, right? You should make for them linen breeches to cover their nakedness. And it tells you exactly how long they're essentially, imagine like boxer shorts, right? They have to extend from the hips to the thighs. Sounds like briefs, right? That's the kind of underwear that the priests are going to wear. So if you thought only people of other religions have special underwear, not so. Our priests have special underwear also. And this is what Aaron and his sons are going to wear. And this is an important point because Noah before talked about clothing as protection. And, the kind of like basic reason for clothing as protection is protection from the elements. Oh, it's raining outside. Let me put on my raincoat. That's clothing as protection. Or cold. Let me put on my winter coat. But here we have, these are going to be on Aaron and his sons when they go into the Ohel Moed, or when they approach the altar to officiate in the sanctuary. The lo yisu avon, so that they do not incur punishment, vamitu, and die. So already people who know what's going to happen in Vayikra know that people can really die if they do it wrong. And we're going to see, we mentioned Nadav and Abihu already, and we're going to see that they're going to mess this up and they are going to die. Not necessarily because they were wearing the wrong clothing, but clothing are part of it. It shall be a law for all time for him and for his offspring to come. No, I feel like I've just talked for forever. So if you want to jump in on anything, or should I keep going? Because there's one other article of clothing that the priest was secretly wearing, says the Talmud.
Go right ahead, please.
Okay. So secretly, the Talmud says on Archin 3b that you might have thought, oh, there's a frontlet and there's a turban. So the priest is just totally covered from here on up. And it says the Gemara, no, Sa'aro hayan yer'ad bein tzitz lemitznafet. He actually had his hairline was showing between his turban and his frontlet. And what was there? Shasham meniach tefillin, because obviously the high priest is wearing tefillin also, in addition to all these other clothes. So he's just wearing a whole lot of stuff going on the high priest's head. Okay, now I said my bit. Go for it. No, okay. Do you want to say anything more about protection?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because tefillin is one of those words that we don't like to translate, because when we translate it, it's phylacteries and people look at you like, what's that? But that it's literally a protective amulet. So it's interesting to me that on top of this special, super special, nobody else gets to wear it, Kohen Gadol garb, he's still wearing your layperson's tefillin. And I think that really speaks to a sort of Jewish sensibility about hierarchy and lack thereof, even though you have to be a Kohen to be the Kohen Gadol, so not everyone can do it. He's still like everyone else. He's still a member of the tribe of, the larger tribe of Israel, the people of Israel, even though he is part of this little subset. And I think that relates to, you're talking about the kind of spread of his special clothing into what lay Jews use as, required identifiers, required ritual garb. And I like it.
And I'm not the first person to say, wow, this Kohen headdress seems very similar to like things that women have used to cover their hair. So I just want to quickly direct your attention to Ibn Ezra, who says it immediately. That's how he even explains what the Kohen Gadol's headdress is. He says, "Mitznefet hi beged dak aruch." The miter, that's what we call miter turban, is made from long, thin material, tanuf saviv harosh, twisted around the head, and ma'at tidmela hamitznefet sheyish berosh hanashim be'ela hamekomot. And it seems similar to the turbans that women in these areas are wearing. And then he says, but men sometimes also wear turbans. And then he says, in Muslim countries, in Spain, Africa, Egypt, Babel, Baghdad, it's actually men who wear turbans and not women. So when I taught this earlier today, someone said, oh, so women in those countries weren't covering their hair. More likely women are wearing veils and men are wearing turbans. But just in terms of imagining what you're doing with the fabric that's on your head. And he says, you just have to remember that things that people wore in Israel or in the times of Tanakh, they're different from what we wear today. And that's okay, says the Ibn Ezra. But I love that his immediate, I have to explain, what is the Kohen Gadol's mitznafat? What are you supposed to imagine? This is what you're imagining when you imagine the Kohen Gadol's mitznafat. And to me, that's just a really, really beautiful, really powerful idea. And just to continue with this idea of what we wear on our heads is what the Kohen Gadol was wearing on his head. So the Gemara in Brachot it describes that the morning Brachot, that you would be reciting those as part of your wake up in the morning ritual. And truly everyone has a wake up in the morning ritual. Maybe it's not open my eyes and say Moda'ani, which is my wake up in the morning ritual, but most people, it's not every single morning they do something different. It's wake up, use the bathroom, brush your teeth, right? A really set thing that you do until culminating in your coffee when you wake up and can now make conscious decisions about the rest of your day. But so it used to be, or the Gemara describes the practice of those brachot being as you do your morning ritual, each step of the way, you get out of bed and feel the ground under you. Wow, rokaha aretz alamayim. Wow, that's when you're making the blessing for God who created firm ground. And one of those blessings is Oter Yisrael B'Tifara, one who crowns Israel with glory. So what's the step in your wake up routine at which you say who crowns Israel with glory? Paris Sudra Aresha. When you spread a shawl upon your head or put your turban on, that's when you say Oter Yisrael B'Tifara. So right, you cover your head in the morning, and that's the crown of Israel with glory. And where's that word glory? What's that glory reminding you of?
Kavod Titer.
Yeah. Does the person who just chimed in want to say anything else, or you're just following along with me very well?
Just following along.
Amazing. Just wanted to give you the opportunity. All right, so hopefully I've convinced you now a little bit, or at least you see the point I'm trying to make, that when we say Otar Yisrael b'tifara, that glory is a nod to the glory clothes that the Kohanim were wearing, including their own elaborate headdresses that were actually, I should have mentioned this, the regular priests are wearing migbaot, versus the high priest who wears a mitznefet. So the migbaot, I'll see if I can show you this picture. So the migbaot are those coney ones, and the mitznefet is the like rounder one. And there's just a debate about whether there's a button on top of the cones or not. There's a debate amongst medieval commentators about that. So they bring you to, this is an amazing, pictures in this book are really, oh, that's the back of the book, this book, are really fun. If you ever want if you're ever studying this stuff in depth and you want a book that draws it out for you. I'm very spatially challenged and like visually challenged, so I love like books where other people made the pictures for me. Anyways, oh no, go ahead. What were you gonna say?
Yeah, I just I was thinking, looking through the morning blessings, trying to think of other times that we make a blessing on clothing, and some people still have the custom to make a shechianu blessing on certain types of clothing. And I think it's interesting to consider. We were talking before about what goes into the construction, the manufacture of clothing that we wear today, and just thinking about like what we have in our wardrobe that we would make that blessing on, because again, previously when these blessings were established, people did not have fast fashion, like, to put it lightly. So
they had slow fashion.
Yeah. So any new item that you get in your wardrobe might merit that. Maybe not a pair of socks, I don't know, but like most items were substantial. But now maybe you made it on your wedding dress. I don't know. But I'm thinking like a good winter coat that I get like every few years. That's more or less it for me. But I don't know, just another thing to think about.
Yeah, totally. But I think, what I love about the Birkot HaShachar is like, these aren't new clothes, these aren't new things. It's not like new today that I successfully opened my eyes, but it is new today that I successfully opened my eyes. And so also even things that I've worn before, I still say Otar Yisrael v'tifara, because once again today I will feel glorious in my headdress. And yet, this is where I want to go in 1 second. I have one more piece of evidence that head covering and even head covering for women is tied into this high priest that I want to show you. But I think on the other hand, is it like, so we've seen this glory piece of these head coverings, and at the same time we've seen that Aaron, the high priest's clothes, are actually atonement. And so what does it mean to have something that symbolizes glory also be atonement? And that's where I want to dig in after that. But I just want to quickly, I don't know whether you can really look at the source quickly, but insofar as one can quickly talk about kimchi, we have the Gemara has this woman, and she becomes important also like in later literature about hair covering, particularly. So Kimchi, she has 7 sons. They all serve in the office of the high priesthood. I always like to point out that that's like not really a good thing, right? Like you really want to have only one son who becomes high priest, and ideally like not in your lifetime, right? Like ideally your husband is the high priest and he like keeps that job for a really, really, really long time and nothing bad happens to him. And the Gemara has this like amazing, so if you have to run away to an Ir Miklat, have to run away to a city of refuge. So when do you get to leave? You get to leave when the high priest dies. And so the mother of the high priest would like knit sweaters basically, or like she would like send goodie bags to all the people in the Ir Miklat so that they wouldn't pray for her son to die, which is like really intense and really beautiful. But it gives you, it helps. I think it sheds a little bit of light on this woman who had 7 sons who were all high priests, that like that's complicated. Like that's not how it's supposed to be. But anyways, so I think this story is like really complicated in general. But here you have Kimchi, all of her sons were high priests. They said to her, "Ma'asit shezachit lakach, what did you do to merit this?" And she says, "It's my head covering that merited this." And again, like this language of zechia, like it doesn't have to be positive. You know, that the English here that I took from the William Davidson Talmud on Sfaria says like, what good deeds did you perform? But you don't have to read it as good deeds. The good deeds edition there is optional. And it's really like, what did you do that this happened to you? Is a fully reasonable read of this story also. And she says, I was so in all my days, the beams of my house never saw the braids of my hair. She says it's all about my head covering. And so in later texts that are really trying to like encourage women to cover every strand of their hair, you're going to see this story as if it's like a good thing. And I'm just not so sure that the story is one I personally want to emulate. But I think this idea that she has, at least, that there's a connection between her head covering and the office of the high priesthood that enables her children successively, so many of them, to serve in it. I think that just again shows her sense of like, and our tradition sense that there's a relationship between the way we all, our men and women, cover their heads, and this the turban, the mitznefet of the high priest. So that's all. That's the only reason I'm bringing this. I do have, in the context in which we were full on like going deep into these sources, I would bring it in greater context in Yoma, where it has a lot more to say about it. And like all of it's the reception history of that story, I think, is very interesting as well. But maybe in the last 15 minutes, we'll turn over to the, on the one hand, glory, and on the other hand, humility. On the other hand, maybe there's like something more complicated going on with what does it mean to put something on top of my head? Maybe that means that my head is not the top of the universe. So the Gemara here, it says in the name of, and in Erechim, it says in the name of Rabbi Anani Bar Sasson, he asks a question in Vayikra. So in Vayikra, you have, why is it that the Kohen, that the Bigdei Kehuna, the priestly vestments, are juxtaposed to all these passages about the offerings? And he says, it comes to teach you, Omar Lach, Ma korbanot mechaprim af bigdei kehuna mechaprim. Just as offerings atone, so do priestly vestments atone. And then it goes through one by one and explains, each one. So the tunic, the ketonet, is about bloodshed, and that goes to Joseph's brothers as evidence, and Joseph's ketonet. The trousers, or like the priestly underwear, are about forbidden. They atone for forbidden sexual relations. Okay, so now let's go to the mitre, the turban. The turban atones for the arrogant. And according to the opinion of Rabbi Chanina, as Rabbi Chanina says, it is logical that an item placed at elevation, yavo davar shebegova v'chaper al maseh gova, and it shall come and atone for the matter of an elevated heart. So all of a sudden we see, the turban, it's l'chavodu l'tifaret. All the clothes are l'chavodu l'tifaret, and now we're seeing actually these clothes are to atone for sin. They're to atone for bloodshed. They're to atone for gilui arayot, and they're to atone for gasei haruach. They're to atone for arrogance. And so if our head covering is on the one hand about glory, and on the other hand about not being arrogant, and we see that playing out in other places too. So if we just skip to the end here, and then we can discuss for the last 10 minutes, but if we just skip to this Gemara in Kiddushin, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says a person's not allowed to walk 4 cubits in an upright posture, in an arrogant way. Asur l'adam shalich arba amot bekomaz kufa. And why? Because you're supposed to recognize milo kol haaretz kevodo, that the entire world is full of his glory. And then Rav Huna B'rei Rav Yeshua says, yeah, and how do I live that out? Lo maske arba amot begilui harosh amar shchina lamala me roshi. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, would not walk 4 cubits with an uncovered head. Why? He says, the divine presence is above my head. So on the one hand, we have turbans and hair covering, even of the high priest, holding both of those things at once. The turban of the high priest, on the one hand, is for glory and honor and dignity. And on the other hand, it is a kapara. It is an atonement for too much dignity. It's an atonement for haughtiness, and it's an atonement for arrogance. And similarly, even for regular people, we see here in Kiddushin, why does Ravuna Breder Rabbi Yeshua cover his head? He covers it to remember Shechina Lamala Mirushi, the divine presence is above my head. And so it's not only an atonement for regular people for arrogance, but actually a protection from arrogance. We were talking about what do clothes protect you from. And at the same time, it's a crown and it's glory. And holding those two things all wrapped up, rolled up into one item. To me, if you said to me, like, why should I cover my head? Why should I wear a yarmulke? Why should I do kisui rosh? Like, to me, this is the story. The story is cover your hair, because on the one hand, it's Oteri Yisrael B'Tifara. On the one hand, it's crowning Israel in glory. And what is the crown of Israel in glory? It's remembering that God is above us. God is Meloch La'aretz Kavodo, Shechinah L'mala Miroshi, that the divine presence is above my head. So what is actually crowning, or the crowning glory of the Jewish people that our head covering symbolizes? It's the recognition and the humility before God, and that's actually the crown of the Jewish people. Okay. So that's my bit. I feel like I just talked for forever. So Noah, do you have any thoughts or responses or feelings about any of this?
Oh yeah, I mean, of course, I have tons of thoughts and feelings, and not so much responses. But I really do like the idea of like considering the aspect of protection and the idea that we're protecting ourselves, from our own arrogance, from getting above ourselves. But I find it extremely interesting how this plays out in a mixed society. Even within the Jewish world, there is like this very interesting dress code based on what type of kippah a man wears. And it's gotten a little blurred, but it's like, oh, well, I don't know if you would want to date him because he wears a velvet kippah. And it's like, what? So it becomes a matter of group representation, and sometimes misrepresentation. I used to cover my hair, not for religious purposes. I got yelled at when I became religious and I was covering my hair because people were like, you're going to confuse your zivug. And I was like, anyone who would marry me is going to understand that I'm weird and I do what I want. But I didn't want certain types of attention that I was getting. And I felt a change in the attention when I was covering my hair. And that was fascinating to me, because I went from getting flirtatious attention that I wasn't interested in at school to getting Islamophobic attention that I'm not qualified to respond to for a number of reasons. But, and I'm sure you've noticed this as a woman who covers her hair for religious reasons, other people have ideas about why you're doing what you're doing, and they will often express judgment based on their own reasoning. And I suppose the religious answer might be like, well, either you need to educate, direct them to a shiur on the subject that you have recordings of on YouTube, or you just need to accept that as part of the humility aspect, that people are going to misunderstand what you're doing. And the question of, yes, like this protects me from my own arrogance. Does it protect me from other people's ignorance? And balancing those types of protection is, my relationship with God and showing deference to God more important than protecting myself from people targeting me for violence because I have my head covered, which again, fascinating given that it is so recent that people just run around with uncovered heads as the norm. For most of human history, I love looking at historic headgear. Like if you look at different Jewish communities, what women wore historically, it's a great way to spend an afternoon on Google. So feel free. But I also I feel like I have to. This doesn't fit in perfectly, but there's an idea in Lurianic Kabbalah. So if you're not into that, just plug your nose for a second. That when you see something, like we know scientifically, like it's rays of light that your, lenses in your eyes and all the little rods and cones interpret into shapes, and your brain is like, I see a thing. Great. But in Lurianic Kabbalah, your soul actually comes out of your eyes and touches the thing that you're looking at. And I find that fascinating with the idea of covering one's body, different parts of one's body, covering one's hair, to imagine everyone looking at you, touching you, and touching either your hair or your head covering. And I'm sure a lot of us, probably more Rabbanit Sarna than myself, because you have wonderful curly hair, have people who have wanted to touch it at different points in life and might not always have asked about it. And yeah, I'm just kind of like riffing on my own fascination with the way that we moderate social distance with head covering. Some people feel that they can become closer to us because of it, not always in ways that we want. And it keeps other people at a distance, again, for reasons of either correct interpretation or misinterpretation. And I wonder what the Kohen Gadol felt wearing his turban, and what people felt seeing that. If they felt like, I want to get close to him, I want to touch him, I want to touch it, because this is a cool thing. He's the only one walking around in that particular type of Big Day Kahuna. They probably couldn't get close enough to touch him, but you could still have that feeling in your heart, I want to touch it. I know that feeling very well. Or were they scared? Did they say, I'm too close to someone who is standing between worlds? You know, that's what he's doing. He's going into the Holy of Holies to negotiate with God somewhat for us. Yeah, so I talked a lot.
I love that question. What popped into my head is Hannah, where like she's in there, she's praying, and the Kohen Gadol like comes and she fights back against him. She fights back against someone who's like wearing this whole getup, and who even like at least the Midrash understands that the Urim and Tumim that he was wearing had like tried to communicate to him that what she was doing was fine, but that he had like mixed up the letters and confused it. But right, like she's going up against this guy and actually confidently doing it. And I think when you fully imagine what it must have felt like to go up against someone in this like one in a generation regalia and the expense of it that's described in this week's Parsha, it gives you, I think, even more kind of, Hannah's an impressive lady to start out with, but I think when you add in that perspective of like the clothing and the environment, that's a whole new level.
For sure. And it also speaks to just how bitter of soul she was, how distraught she was, that she didn't care, you know. It's like seeing, I don't want to compare the Kohen Gadol to a monster, but someone with a tremendous amount of social power, and you're someone with no social power and nothing to lose, you know, just tell it how it is.
And then she sends her son over to him. Like, that's crazy.
Does the Kohen Gadol wear all of the clothes all of the time that he's in the Beis HaMikdash? Or does he dress like a normal Kohen much of the time?
My understanding is that he's like wearing the getup when he's at work. These are his work clothes. And he has slightly different ones for Yom Kippur. So that's
right.
Lots of different ones for Yom Kippur. Lots of costume changes.
Back and forth, right. Yeah. But on a normal day, when he's there, he's fully dressed.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
I can't wait to see it someday, but yeah.
Right. I mean, another thing I was thinking of that is clothing adjacent is how the king is always supposed to have a literal Sefer Torah on him. And thinking about this kind of, I mean, you titled this source sheet, head covering and royalty. So I feel like, obviously, like there are different ideas about what a king of Israel might have worn clothing wise, but we do know that what he's instructed to wear on him is a Sefer Torah. And that seems like got more of a Cohen vibe to it, like, you know, whereas Big Day Kohanim, particularly the Kohen Gadol, I mean, like, we know in detail what his crown looks like. We know that he's wearing gold on him, lots of bling, you know, and that kind of, I don't want to say juxtaposition or mix up. But again, it's another thing that feels very, very Jewish for the political leader to be carrying around a religious item, a religious artifact, and for the religious leader just to have like really cool jewelry. And like, granted, it has like all these different spiritual qualities that we're talking about and a lot of deep symbolism, but it seems more like something you would see in a throne room than something you would expect someone leading a religious service to be wearing. So I think that's another somewhat interesting element. I mean,
that's a conversation for another time, but like, is this idolatry? I think is like a really important question. But maybe for Kitisa or something like that. I think we're just about at time. But Noah, thank you so much for a great conversation. I loved hearing all your thoughts up to and including the Lurianic Kabbalah. Not my normal thing.
Well, thank you as always. It's always great to talk about Torah and to hear your teaching. And if anyone else has something that you might want to share, you can chime in real quick. Please don't be shy. I always try to say whatever I'm thinking, for better and worse. So
What was on the sources we didn't get to?
There's like mostly just one source that we skipped. We skipped a whole bunch of like the different high priest garments and what they atone for. So definitely check that out, because I think that's really interesting. And then we skipped a story about a kid who his mother told him, like, make sure to cover your head all the time, because someone before his birth had told her, like an astrologer had told her he's going to be a thief, and that the head covering is what prevented him from being a thief. And then it fell off one time and he immediately went up and stole stuff. So that's a little Gemara from Masechet Shabbat that I skipped because it felt like it didn't add that much and was a little complicated, but it's great if you want to take a look at it.
Okay, thank you so much to everyone who joined us today on Zoom and also on Facebook. And thank you so much, Rabbanit, Sarna, and Noah. Thank you, everyone. I look forward to seeing you again next week. We'll be with John Kelson and Miss Sophia Stepansky, I hope I'm saying the name correctly, who runs our summer program for middle school girl on Parashat Kitisa. And also just a quick note that our Purim program will be this Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern, featuring Rabbi David and Rabbi Dr. Samuel Liebens. Looking into questions pertaining to what it means to live in a world with an invisible God. So I hope to see you there. And as always, we can find information about all the classes at drisha.org. Thank you so much. Lehitraot.